record as usual. All right, so today is Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. This is the language workstream of the Inclusive Naming Initiative. And this is our bi-weekly reoccurring meeting. This meeting is running a little bit differently than our normal meetings in that the group wanted to have a discussion of scope. Like, what is the scope of the recommendations we are working on, which I think is very timely. As such, I'm going to drop the agenda link for people who have just joined to respect everybody's time and to make sure everybody's thoughts on this get heard. What I'm going to ask everybody who is currently on the call to do is to please read through the agenda first. And I'm going to say at 11:40. So y'all have 6 minutes, a little fast, but it's not that much words. At 6:40, let's come back. And then let's begin the actual discussion. Sound good, everybody? We're starting with the silent read. Away you go. Two-minute mark, everybody. If you have any questions in the what is our scope section of the agenda that I just highlighted, let's feel free to kind of ask there. I've got a couple of questions that I think will help us frame the discussion a little, but if there's anything that comes to mind, please add them. Sorry about that, everybody. My internet dropped very, very suddenly. Mark, could you pass host to me by any chance? It dropped to you when I dropped.
Sure. Let me go find. Okay, make. I don't want to do that. Make. Oh, wait a minute. Ask. So I've selected you. Oh, there we go. Okay, make host. There we go.
Thank you. All right. Is everybody more or less done reading? Would anybody like? Okay, cool. So, to kick off the discussion then, I'm going to ask all of you a question, and I'm not going to comment for now. Based on the thoughts you read below, do we think we have a rough direction of consensus?
Yes.
Okay, Mark and Monica are saying yes. That's the sense that I got too. And if one of you two or anybody else on the call really, and by the way, I think y'all are allowed to talk now. Sorry. Hi, Joanna.
I'm not sure. There are two areas where it's not clear to me that there's great consensus. I don't mean that there's great disagreement, just that it's not clear to me what our focus is.
Mm-hmm.
One is the I like the prioritization of we start like narrowly focused on tech and eventually we might expand. But it's not clear to me. I mean, there's both discussion about even when we expand, we don't try and overlap too much with what other organizations are doing versus, single origin of truth that is inclusive of everything. So I'm not sure like how broad we're going to end up down the line. I don't think that there is clear consensus on that yet. Okay. And then even for, I guess, initial scope, it's like, I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with the narrowness of just code bases and technical documentation, partly because I chair the standards workstream.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and then I also participate in the company workstream.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're already working on we're already being very conscious of language that is outside of just narrowly defined as code bases. So those are the two areas where I don't know that for sure we have great clear consensus.
Okay. So my read on kind of what the opinions below were is I think we want to start with this idea of code bases or technical documentation, and this is I'm just reading what's below and kind of not taking any other opinions into account this second. The question that emerged for me there was, what are we defining as technical content? And I think there's a good secondary concern that Joanna brought up, which is the company and standards work streams are already thinking about Roger. So I think that's important to note as well. But yeah, my question was, what is technical versus non-technical? Like, how do we define that?
That's kind of hard.
We could say, used in computing or engineering.
What about other technical areas of like scientific research and things like that?
Yeah, I
like
think
medical, medical, for example.
Yeah,
Can I ask a
volcanology.
framing question before we proceed?
So I guess my question would be, if you want to go beyond the computer programming and the rest of the company that supports that, whether it's documentation or marketing, if you're going into medical and other areas and beyond just the software for that, do we have representation for that? Do we have people who know the background, or should we stick with the areas that this is a group from people who are in IT and want to make sure that IT is and software is having the right terminology?
Yeah, IT is a big enough field to tackle to start.
Yeah,
Ooh, sorry, pause. I just want to capture a question that Lex just asked in the chat, which is, as a framing question, are we trying to determine the scope for I&I entirely or for the language work stream?
I know it keeps getting bigger, doesn't it? Bigger
Yeah,
and bigger questions.
so I think a part of the quandary of this is that the language workstream is going to kind of determine the scope of the inclusive naming initiative. And I think sorry to cut you off, by the way, Joanna, but I'll say this one thing first, which is, I wonder if, because we're trying to define this idea of technical content or what is like code related, and I wonder if a better way to scope this might be language used in like artifacts or ephemera that tech companies produce or that software companies produce. Because that gives us the scope of like, well, it can cover marketing material. Well, it can cover the technical content or the documentation for a software. It can cover the code base as well. So we scope it to the type of company, which I think, again, we're well represented for software companies here. But that's a bit of a left field suggestion. Sorry, Joanna.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable with describing it as terminology used within information technology. I think that's both broad enough and also, also doesn't encompass the entire world. And, again, the reason why is, I think I don't think we want to just refer to code. I don't think we just want to refer to software companies. We are trying to involve, we do welcome participation by other types of tech companies, many of which are, part of the company Workstream and are actively contributing, and they're not all software companies. So I don't want us to adopt some type of scoping statement that somehow signals that, companies that aren't software companies shouldn't be involved in the I&I. I also think it would be very hard for the standards workstream to recruit a additional standards representation if we're going to actually refer to code and software companies. I think it would be saying information technology is going to better reflect the diversity of viewpoints that are already in the I&I community and the types of organizations we want to recruit.
Mark.
An observation, maybe a question back to Joanna. The observation is if we're thinking of having a visible impact, code is probably the least likely place to do that because hardly anybody's actually looking at code at the end of the day, just the developers. So the communities that are affected by the language there are in most cases not looking at that. So the other materials around it, the artifacts, I think you mentioned, Celeste, have a much bigger, visible impact. And I forgot what my question to Joanne was, so I'll pause now and let someone else speak.
Okay.
When we say code, to me, code also includes the language that comes along with the code, separate from the documentation. Is that what we're talking about, or are we just talking about code?
For me, and this gets back to some sense, and now I do remember my question, Joanne, so I'll probably pose it that way, but this gets back to some sense of a progression of changes in scope that I think multiple people articulated in. I think Joanne's concern is if we say we start here, then that signals, to people that they shouldn't be involved when we ultimately actually maybe do have an intention to expand outward later on. And so to answer your specific question, start here on code, I'm thinking actual code bases and software. That was the context in which I was thinking, and then expanding outwards from that. But I agree with Joanne that alone signals potentially to people who should be involved that, well, initially it doesn't involve us, we're not going to be involved.
So again, just to sort of like guide guide the conversation a little bit. For me, as I read through this, I think the thing that emerged very clearly was this idea of kind of, again, a progression of scope. Like we're going to start narrow and then we're going to get broader and broader. I wonder if we say that as a language work stream, what we're going to focus on is, again, initially, like technical documentation and code bases, and to the extent that it's applicable, kind of marketing language. But then I wonder if we can officially say, and maybe talk to the company workstream about this as well, say like, okay, the language workstream is going to focus on this slightly narrower scope, and they're also going to own sort of the framework, how we do the work, the templates around this, like what the final product starts to look like. But we work with other work streams, for example, the company work stream or the standards work stream, to work on language that is more specific to those domains under the same sort of frameworks. Does that make sense?
I think so, and I think that's what the company work stream was expecting, that in our
Okay.
discussions of terminology, we would, in our scope would be a little bit broader, but we would always be referring to the language work stream to come up with the guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that makes sense to me and to that group.
I also like the idea that that sort of allows a lot of other work streams also to own the language conversation, because while I think it makes sense for us to meet collectively about language things, I also think that like everybody is here because they're hoping to address language. So it seems a little odd to not spread the love, so to speak. Lex, once again, a really fabulous question in the chat. You are just full of wonderful questions, which is, can we solve this problem with a roadmap, i.e. we telegraph that we're starting with IT stuff as a question of raw logistics, noting that there are other targets to come, then people might be willing to join from other industries, knowing other materials are happening later. I think that that's actually a really smart idea. And it's something that organizing a planning session amongst the leads has been on my like mental backlog for a while, but let me put it on my physical backlog so I remember. Okay. So in the interest of time, because we now have 5 minutes left, and unfortunately today I have a hard stop, so I personally cannot continue this. First things first, we have a question on how to consult URMs that I think maybe deserves its own discussion the next time we meet. Second off, I am wondering if, based on this discussion, the best next step is for myself or for Carla or for whomever is interested. Sorry to call you out, Carla, you just sort of came to mind.
No problem.
Is to sort of draft up our thoughts and our discussion as a draft scope of work.
Yeah, I can have a go at that.
If you do not mind. Okay.
So everything is contained within the agenda that we were just looking at.
Everything is contained
Okay.
within the agenda. And I
That's
feel
fine.
like we're, honestly, I feel like we're sort of kind of at consensus.
Yeah.
But I think, as Joanna mentioned, there's still a few, like, I don't want to say holdouts, but there's a few things that we still need to resolve. But I have a feeling that they will be better understood if we attempt to write ourselves a consensus and then
Yeah.
evaluate based on the final product at this point.
That's a good idea. I actually snuck in a little sort of side thing, so it's only fair that I do the job.
No, it's okay. And you were kind of the one who brought up the question, so I feel like you've got a stake in this.
I do.
Okay, draft up Okay, I'm gonna give you that action item and I'm gonna say by our next meeting in 2 weeks.
Sure.
Okay. And again, if you can have that, if you have that out earlier and you can post it to Slack, that's also super useful. But again, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna say that, well, I guess first off, in the few minutes we have left, how did everybody feel about this style of meeting where we sort of wrote our opinions first and then had a discussion based on things that were already written down? Was it good?
Yes,
Yeah,
I like
nice.
this.
Yeah, I think we tend to get into a lot of really long-winded discussions in a very short meeting, so this was very efficient, I thought. So here's a second question. Would you like to do our next meeting in a similar fashion? Because we also still have to answer the question of how we consult underrepresented minorities on the recommendations that we produce. And I have a feeling that will also be a somewhat long-winded discussion. Okay, I will set up the agenda for that now.
A thought, if we're going to do this style of discussion, which is great, I mean, if it is possible to circulate the reading materials, I guess even in advance of the meeting,
Yeah,
that's great, because then people can have some time to read, digest it before the meeting, and then also add their comments in advance of the meeting. Not that we can't also reserve time during the meeting, but I think that's helpful to have some offline discussion before we.
yeah.
I think that will also be good because it'll let us have a little more time for actual discussion during the meeting.
Yeah. And that was kind of on me for not pinging you all a day early. So here's what we're gonna do. The June 8th agenda is already up. As a status update, Carla, I'm gonna put you down for that draft
All right.
statement of work. But I think I have a feeling we're only gonna have time for one of these discussions. So really what it's gonna be is a link and then telling people your review due date for this is X. So the June 8th, agenda is up. I'm going to post a link on Slack. And this time I'm going to set myself a reminder on my calendar to, I'm going to set it for Friday the 4th. Yep. I'm going to set y'all a Friday the 4th reminder. So that's the Friday before we meet to take some time, review, add your discussions. I'm also going to set myself a Slack reminder. And hopefully it will ping the channel. Yeah. When can I? Okay, I'm going to set a Slack reminder after this meeting. As I mentioned, I unfortunately have a hard stop. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks a lot.